Hello and welcome to the next edition of the HP Discover podcast series. I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions, your host and moderator for this ongoing discussion on IT innovation and how it's making an impact on people's lives. Our next DevOps thought leadership discussion explores the building interest in DevOps, that of making the development, test, deployment, and ongoing improvement in software creation a coordinated, lean, and proficient process for enterprises. We're here with a prominent IT industry analyst from Forrester Research to explore what's making DevOps such a hot topic now and to identify steps that successful organizations are taking to make their applications development and deployment a major force that supports and propels their business success. With that, please join me in welcoming our guest. We're here with Kurt Bittner, Principal Analyst, Application Development and Delivery at Forrester Research. Welcome, Kurt.
Thanks, Dana. Great to be here.
We're delighted to have you with us. Let's start by looking at the building interest in DevOps. I've been seeing DevOps mentioned more in the last few months than I recall. What's driving that? What's this building interest in DevOps all about?
Well, it's really essentially the end user organizations or client organizations that are facing increasing pressure from competition, increasing expectations from customers at delivering functionality faster. I was at a dinner the other night, and there were a large, half a dozen or so large banks there. And they were all saying, to my surprise somewhat, is that they didn't feel like they were competing with one another, but they felt like they were competing with companies like Apple, Google, PayPal. And increasingly, these startup companies, Square's a good example too, they're getting into the payment mechanism, and that's siphoning off business from the banks. And so the banks are starting to see drops in their own bottom lines because of competition from more traditional technology companies or software companies. You see companies like Uber having a big impact on traditional taxi companies and transportation. And so it's essentially increasing competition driven by increasing customer expectations, and we're all part of that as consumers. We've gravitated toward our mobile phones over the last 10 years. We're increasingly interacting with companies through the mobile phones, and so delivering new functionality through mobile experiences, through cloud experiences, through the web, through various kinds of payment mechanisms, all of these things contribute to the need to deliver at much faster rates of speed. So traditional companies, so that the startup companies get this, and they're already adopting these techniques in large numbers. What we're finding is that the traditional companies are increasingly saying, we have to do this. This is a competitive threat to us, and like Blockbuster, they may cease to exist if they don't.
Right. So with a company like Apple or Uber, they probably define themselves as being technology companies. That's what they do. Software is a huge part of what makes them a company at all, that defines them. So what is it about DevOps that is making this interest in being very good at software so prominent? What is it that DevOps brings to the table?
Well, what DevOps does is it optimizes the delivery pipeline. So, and that's just basically the steps that you have to go through between when you have an idea and when a customer starts benefiting from that idea. So in traditional delivery processes, you've got lots of handoffs, you've got lots of stops and starts, you've got relatively inefficient processes, and it can take months and sometimes years to go from idea to actually having somebody get some benefit out of that. So with DevOps, you're trying to reduce the size of the things that you're delivering so you can deliver more frequently, and then eliminate handoffs and eliminate inefficiencies in that process, in the delivery process, so that you can deliver it as fast as possible with higher quality.
And what was broken? What needs to be fixed? Wasn't Agile supposed to fix this?
Well, it's interesting. Agile is part of the solution, but many Agile teams find that they would like to be more Agile, but they're held back by lack of testing environments. They're held back by lack of testing automation. They're held back by lack of deployment automation. So they themselves have lots of barriers. So Agile's part of it in the sense of involving the business more on a day-to-day basis in the project decision-making, but and it also provides the ability to break a problem down into smaller increments and deliver, at least demonstrate in smaller increments, but it doesn't actually deliver into production in smaller increments, and so you need to have these other capabilities to do that. One also illustration of how DevOps helps to accelerate Agile is that talking to a large manufacturing organization. They were making the transition to Agile, and they had a problem that they were not able to get development or test environments for months because of their, basically IT operations processes had been set up in a very siloed way so that the priority over development and testing environments got low priority when other things were going on. And so as much as the team wanted to work in an Agile way, they couldn't get a test environment. And so, in effect, they were completely stopped from any forward progress. There's only so much you can do on a developer workstation. So these DevOps practices actually benefit Agile as well as enabling Agile to really fully realize the promise that it's had.
Is there a change in philosophy too, Kurt, where some of the startups will put software out there really before it's cooked and let the environment, the real world, be their test bed, their simulation, if you will, and they start doing rapid iterations? Are we going to start seeing that now as DevOps gains ground in established traditional enterprises?
Well, it really, so you're right. There is a tendency towards more getting functionality out there, seeing what the market says about it, and then improving. And that works in certain areas. For example, Google has an internal motto that says, if you're not somewhat embarrassed by your first release, you didn't move fast enough. But we also have to realize that we've got software in our automobiles, we've got software in our aircraft, and you don't want to put something out there into those environments that's basically not functional. So I separate the essentially measures of quality from measures of sort of just aesthetic qualities. So the software that gets delivered early has to be high quality. It can't be buggy. It has to work and satisfy a certain set of needs. But there's a wide variety of sort of variability in whether people will like it or not, or whether people will use it or not. And so when organizations are delivering quickly and getting feedback from the market, they're really getting feedback on things like usability and aesthetics, and not necessarily on some critical business processing capability, or let's say the software in your ABS system in your car. You want that. You don't want that to fail, but you might be very interested in how the climate control system works, and that may be subject to wide variations. To get better fuel efficiency, you may be willing to sacrifice something in the air conditioner to provide better efficiency. So it's largely driving feedback on sort of non-safety critical features that is where most organizations are focused.
So you mentioned feedback. That seems to be a core aspect of DevOps, more feedback between operations, the real world, the use of software, and the development process and test process. How do we sort of compress that feedback loop, and not only for user experience, but also data, real data coming out of an embedded system, for example, what the machine is doing so that we can improve? So let's address feedback and compressing the feedback loop.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you think about what traditional application releases do, is that they tend to bundle a lot of different features into a single release and put it out there. And if you're thinking about this from a sort of statistical perspective, that means you've got a lot of independent variables. You can't tell what improved. When something improved, you can't tell why it improved because you've got so many different variables in there. So in the feedback loop with DevOps, you want to make the increment of release as small as possible, basically one thing at a time, and then measure the result from that. So you know that your results improved because of that one single feature. The other thing is that we start to shift towards a more outcome-oriented release. So you're not releasing features, but you're doing things that will change a customer's outcome. And if it doesn't change a customer's outcome, the customer doesn't really care. And so by having releases be the increment of a release being an outcome at a time, and then measuring the result from that, you get the capabilities out there as quickly as possible, and then you can tell whether you actually improved because of what you just did. If you didn't improve, then you stop doing that. You do something else.
Is that what you mean by continuous delivery, this iterative small parts rather than the whole big dump every 6 to 12 months?
Yeah, that's a big part of it. Continuous delivery is also more precisely a process by which you make small changes, you optimize the delivery cycle, removing waste and removing handoffs to make that as fast as possible with high degrees of automation so that you can get out there and get the feedback as quickly as possible. So it's a combination. It usually means not just the fast delivery, but a number of techniques that are used to improve that delivery.
All right, for folks that are listening and reading this, they might very well like the idea of DevOps. I'd like to do DevOps. Where do I buy it? DevOps, though, isn't really a product. It's not a box. It's not a download. It's a vision, a way of thinking, an architectural approach. So how do people go about implementing DevOps? Where do you start?
Well, you're right. It's more of a philosophy than a product. It's not even really a product category. It's a bunch of different products and processes and, to some degree, a philosophy behind that. When we talk to organizations who have implemented this successfully, there are a couple of patterns. First of all, you don't basically implement DevOps across an entire organization all at once. It tends to happen product by product, team by team, and it happens first in the applications that are very customer-facing, because that's where the most pressure is right now. That's where the biggest benefit is. And so on a team-by-team basis, you have, first of all, you've got to have some sort of, typically, executive mandate to make a change. Somebody has to feel like this is important enough to the company. While developers and engineers and IT ops people can be passionate about this, it typically requires executive leadership to get this to happen, because these changes cut across the traditional organizational silos. And so without some executive sponsorship, then these initiatives tend not to go very far. The first step tends to be, initially, changing the way that you, and this is in a sort of very mundane area, changing the way that environments are provisioned. So getting environments provisioned on demand, using techniques like infrastructure as code to automatically generate environments based on configuration settings, so that you can have an environment basically anytime you need it. That removes a lot of friction, a lot of delays. Second things that tend to be implemented are techniques like continuous integration, and then after that, test automation based around APIs. So there's a shift to API-oriented architectures for the applications, and then usually deployment automation comes after that. So once you've got environments provisioned and code that you can put into those environments, you need a way to move that code between environments. So as you make those changes, then you start to run into organizational barriers, silos in the organization that prevent effective working together. There's too much wait time when people are assigned to multiple different projects or multiple different applications. So there's a shift in team structure to become more product-oriented with dedicated resources to a product, so that you can do release after release most effectively. And that tends to break the organizational silos down and start shifting to a more product-centric organization and away from a functionally oriented organization. So all of those changes together typically take years, but it usually starts with some sort of executive mandate and then environment provisioning and so on.
It sounds, too, that having a better management capability across these silos, with metrics, with dashboards, with validating efforts, being able to measure discreetly what's going on and then reinforce the good and discard the bad is important. Are there any particular existing ways of doing that? I'm thinking about the long-term application lifecycle management marketplace. Does that lend itself to DevOps, or do we need to start from scratch and create a new management layer, if you will, across the whole continuum of software design, test, and delivery?
Well, it's a little bit of both. So DevOps is really an outgrowth of ALM. So all of the aspects of ALM are there. You need to be able to manage the work, track the work, determine what work got done. In addition to that, you're adding automation in the areas I was just describing, environment provisioning, continuous integration, test automation, and deployment automation. And in addition, there's another component that becomes really important, because out of those applications, you want to start gathering customer experience data. And so things like operational analytics and test and application analytics are important to start measuring the customer experience. So combining all those together into a sort of a single view, single dashboard is evolving now. So the ALM tools are evolving in that direction, and there are ways of visualizing that. But right now, it tends to be a multi-vendor ecosystem. So there's not, you don't find, one DevOps suite from one company that provides everything. But the good news is that the same thing that's been happening in the rest of the industry around services and interoperability has happened in applications. And so we've got a high degree of interoperability between tools from different vendors today that allow you to customize this delivery pipeline to give you the DevOps capability.
It seems that in some ways, the prominence of hybrid cloud models and mobile first thinking when it comes to development are accelerants to DevOps. If you have that multiple cloud goal, you're going to want to standardize on your production environment, hence also the interest in containers these days. And of course, mobile first forces you to think about user experience, small iterations, apps rather than applications. So is that what's happening? Do you see acceleration from these other trends reinforcing DevOps?
It's both reinforcing it and to some degree causing it, because it's it's mobile in a sense that's triggered this explosion in the need for DevOps, the need for faster delivery, because just to a large degree, the mobile application is the proverbial tip of the iceberg. That mobile application, very few mobile applications stand alone. They all have very rich services running behind them. They've got systems of record providing the data. And so virtually every mobile application is really a composite application with some parts in the cloud and some parts in traditional data centers. And the development across all of those different code lines and the coordination of releases across all those different code lines is really requires a DevOps approach to be able to do that successfully. So it's both demand created by higher customer expectations from mobile customers, but also the complexity of delivering these applications in a really rapid way across all those different platforms. Now, you made an interesting point about cloud and containers being both drivers for demand, but also and enablers, but also they're changing the nature of the work. And so as containers and microservices become more prevalent, we're seeing growth in those areas. It's increasing the complexity of application delivery. It simplifies the deployment, but it increases the complexity, because now instead of having to coordinate dozens of moving parts, you have to coordinate hundreds and sometimes we think in the future at some point thousands of moving parts. And so that's well beyond what somebody can do with spreadsheets and manual management techniques. The other thing is that cloud it simplifies environment provisioning tremendously, and so it provides this great elastic infrastructure for deploying applications, but it also simplifies it by standardizing the environments, making it all software configurable. So it's a tremendous benefit to delivering applications faster, gives you much more flexibility than traditional data center type applications. So there's definitely movement towards those kind of applications, especially for DevOps.
And when I heard you mention the complexity, it certainly sounds like automating and moving away from manual processes, standardizing processes across your development, test, and deploy continuum would be really important first steps to take.
Yeah, absolutely. It's probably, I would say it's even more, I would say more than important. It's absolutely essential that without automation and without that sort of data-driven visibility into what's happening in the applications, there's almost no way to deliver these applications at speed. We find that many organizations, many organizations are releasing quarterly now, not necessarily the same app every quarter, but they've got a quarterly release cycle. And at quarterly rates of speed, you can sort of, through, seat of the pants and sort of brute force, you can manage to get that release out. It's not pretty, it's pretty painful, but you can sort of survive. But if you turn up the clock rate faster than that and try to get down to monthly, those manual processes just completely fall apart. And we've got organizations today that want to be delivering at weekly intervals and at daily intervals, and especially in SaaS-based environments or cloud-based environments. So those kind of delivery speeds are inconceivable with any kind of manual processes. And so as organizations move away from quarterly releases to faster releases, they have to adopt these techniques.
Listening to you, Kurt, it sounds like DevOps isn't another buzzword, another flashy marketing term. It really sounds inevitable if you're going to succeed at software.
It's inevitable, and I think that over the next 5 years, what we'll see is that is that the word itself will probably fade because it will simply become the way that organizations work.
Great. I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. We've been exploring the popularity of DevOps, of making development, test, deployment, and ongoing improvement in software creation a coordinated, lean, and proficient process. And we've heard from a prominent industry analyst at Forrester Research about what's making DevOps such a hot topic and steps that organizations are taking to make it successful. So please join me in thanking our guest. We've been here with Kurt Bittner, Principal Analyst, Applications Development and Delivery at Forrester Research. Thank you, Kurt.
Thank you, Dana.
And a big thank you also to our audience as well for joining us for this DevOps thought leadership discussion. Case studies are also going to be part of our repertoire here, and look forward to more of those on BriefingsDirect. I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inevitability Solutions, your host for this ongoing series of HP-sponsored discussions. Thanks again for listening, and come back next time.